Welcome to Freshwater People, a podcast from Great Lakes Now. I'm Rob Green. If you're in the Great Lakes region, you've probably heard a lot of talk about data centers. These are the facilities being built to help power AI technology that's working its way into our daily lives. Communities throughout the region are having tough conversations about whether or not they want data centers built in their backyards, but you can't discuss something you don't know about. Tom Kertscher is with Wisconsin Watch. He's been reporting on how tech companies are using non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, to keep information about proposed data centers under wraps. For his reporting, Tom received a Freedom of Information Award. This is part of an ongoing series of interviews with reporters who cover data centers around the Great Lakes. Tom, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Rob. Good to be with you.
We're talking about things that are hidden from the public, so let me first ask you, how did this story come to your attention?
I thought I should do a story on data centers in Wisconsin, but was trying to look for an angle that hadn't been done before. Spent about a week looking, couldn't find anything, and then at the last minute, so to speak, someone told me about stranded assets. Those are power plants that have been shut down or scheduled to be shut down soon, but the debt is still owed. So think about, you take a 10-year loan out on your car. If you junk your car after 5 years, you still have 5 years worth of payments, right? So Wisconsin Watch found that in Wisconsin, utility ratepayers, so residents, businesses, owe more than $1 billion on the debt for these stranded assets. It was data center adjacent, if you will, because the concern is big rush to build data centers, consequently big rush to build power plants. What happens if AI and data centers aren't as big as we expect? It could create a new round of stranded assets. And then to get more to your question, at that point, I was still looking for a sort of on-point data center story and got an email from a Wisconsin Watch reader. And sort of parenthetically, he mentioned non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs. That really caught my attention, led me to do a bunch of public records requests. And what we found is that at the time, there were 4 communities in Wisconsin that had signed these NDAs. So think about a city government or a village signing a contract with a data center developer, basically agreeing to keep these gigantic projects under wraps.
I want to talk about the NDAs in a minute, but first let's talk about the data centers. Wisconsin already has several dozen of them, but your reporting has focused on a few very large data centers that have been proposed or are already being built. What makes those different and controversial?
Right. You're right. There's several dozen that are sort of under the radar. People wouldn't have even known about, except for the fact that these hyperscale, very large data centers are now being proposed or are under construction. None of them are actually operating in Wisconsin yet, but 3 of them are under construction. Concerns for various reasons. They can occupy hundreds of acres of land. They can cost several $billion. They need lots of water, not so much to operate on a daily basis, but to produce the electricity, the unprecedented amounts of electricity. So a lot of concerns about the impact, and at the same time, also a big economic impact as well.
Now, about the NDAs, when a public official signs a non-disclosure agreement, what is that official promising to do or not do?
So the impetus comes from the data center developer, the company that wants to build a data center. They approach a city government, a village, and ask for a non-disclosure agreement. And it basically can keep the entire project under wraps. In other words, the local government is agreeing we will not disclose anything about this project, to the extent that even the NDAs themselves don't use the word data center. They talk about project. And so, puts local government and people in a very difficult position, in the sense that you can understand from the data center developer's point of view, it's competitive, right? They don't want their competitors to know where they want to put a data center, how large it would be. you can understand the desire to have a non-disclosure agreement. From a city or village perspective, similar, there's competition for these data centers. So there's some incentive to try to keep things quiet, at least for a while. But, the local government elected officials or the staff, their obligation is to the public. They're supposed to be looking out for residents. And what we found in our first NDA story was that local governments were working on these projects for months, or even in a couple of cases, more than a year. So there's a lot of back and forth, emails, plans. How do we use land? Do we need a zoning change? What's the access to power? All this stuff going on in the background for months or more than a year before any announcement is made to the public of, oh, hey, there's a data center being proposed.
Right now, I think there are 3 hyperscalers under construction in Wisconsin, and 5 more have been proposed. One that's under construction is in Beaver Dam, and the NDA that kept that project under wraps seems to be what kicked off this whole debate. How did things go, or how did they unfold in Beaver Dam?
So that's a project that Meta is involved with, or it's actually under construction now. And the company that pushed that development approached the local economic development agency. And that's another variation on this kind of thing. Sometimes the data center developers are dealing directly with city halls, so to speak. In other cases, like in Beaver Dam, they went to an economic development corporation. Tricky in the sense that it's technically a nonprofit, a private entity, so to speak, but in effect really is an arm of the local government. So that can be another layer of secrecy, if you will. If a person heard that, gee, there's talk of a data center in my city, and then they worried about an NDA, they might go to City Hall and say, hey, have you signed an NDA? Technically, the city could say, well, no, it's the Economic Development Corporation. So, and there the NDA was in place for more than a year before the public is informed of the project, but it is now underway, or construction is underway.
The NDAs seem to have touched a nerve, but in fact, they're pretty common when planning major developments. What's the argument in favor of NDAs?
Yeah, I think the argument in favor, again, coming from the perspective of the developer, the company that wants to produce a development, they're in a competitive environment, and so they want to keep as many details confidential as long as possible. From a local government perspective, there may be a similar incentive in that, we don't want the community down the road or halfway across the state to get this data center, so let's keep it quiet. The backlash that's occurred is there's a lot more opposition now that develops very quickly when a data center is learned of. And I think the NDAs are part of that. So you've got a situation where people may, like I was more than a year ago, maybe know a very little about artificial intelligence, maybe even less about data centers. So they're uneasy perhaps about the whole idea of these giant projects coming forward because it's something new and not well understood. Then you throw in an NDA and people say, wait a minute, I'm not sure how I feel about a data center, but now I find out that my local officials have been working on this quietly for many months. That's going to spur opposition just by itself.
Even in communities that haven't signed NDAs, your reporting talks about DeForest, there's still been a certain level of secrecy.
Right. An excellent point. So in DeForest, which is a suburb of Madison, they did not sign an NDA, but we found that they were exchanging emails, communicating with the data center company for 7 months before any announcement was made. The day after we published our story about these NDAs and other efforts to keep things secret, DeForest dropped the project. And so, it's evidence of people don't like the idea that these things are happening without their knowledge. And it's produced some legislation proposals some bills have been proposed to ban local governments from signing these NDAs for data centers. Whether that's the right approach, I don't know. It's a policy question, right? To ban them entirely, is that the best way? Maybe there's a place for these NDAs for some period of time to do this due diligence. Is this thing even feasible? But at some point, the public needs to be brought in. And so, it's a big policy question. Should that happen the same day that a phone call is made to City Hall? Maybe not. But should it take more than a year before the public is notified? That seems like a long time.
It seems like, you've mentioned people don't love the secrecy. They don't love the feeling that they've been kept in the dark. But it feels like, I don't know, maybe there's more than that to it. Wisconsin Watch has published several videos of town halls and other meetings where people have spoken their minds. What are some of the other reasons that you hear from people that's sort of inspiring them to stand up to the companies that want to build data centers?
Yeah, there are people who are concerned about loss of farmland, for example. The data centers, I think it's fair to say, aren't generally viewed as attractive visually. So you've got, something that might occupy hundreds of acres that's not attractive, perhaps. And then, more so the concerns, I think, are about environment. How much water is this data center going to use? Is that going to threaten our water supply or threaten Lake Michigan, for example? And then, on top of that, electricity. So you need even more water to produce more electricity to serve these data centers. And what'll happen to electric rates? There's suddenly this huge, unprecedented demand for more electricity. Who's going to pay for that? And so a big debate about should the data center companies pay for the cost, not only of the electricity they use in a data center, but what it costs to generate that, or will some of that cost fall to the general ratepayers?
Seeing the resistance that's popped up when data centers are revealed to the public, when the plans are revealed, has that created any change? Are things unfolding differently now, or is the process changing now that it's sort of known how the public reacts when these things are revealed?
Yeah, there are some different communities, I think, they're changing their approach a little bit. In central Wisconsin, in the city of Menominee, there was an NDA and then a backlash to that. And now the city is in the process of gathering a lot more input from citizens, seeking comment, holding meetings. There's that kind of a reaction. There's the legislation I mentioned, a couple of different bills that would ban NDAs. Those aren't going anywhere this year, though, unless there's something extraordinary happening. They won't be taken up again until 2027. So that's pending. And then Microsoft announced, in a national announcement, that they would no longer sign NDAs with local governments. We did a story about that. I think the thrust there was, will other data center companies follow suit? I haven't seen that yet. But maybe the larger question is, how will local government folks respond? Are there going to be more communities that say, hey, we're not going to do NDAs, or we're going to do them, but put some guidelines around, how long they'll be in place, for example?
It seems as though where there has been opposition, it's been somewhat bipartisan. It doesn't seem to fall along party lines, which is unusual these days. Is that what you're finding?
The Marquette Law School poll, which is the premier poll in Wisconsin, has found that with two polls now, including one out today, that it is bipartisan in the sense, if you focus on the question of, do data centers bring more problems than benefits? There's widespread agreement on that among Republicans and Democrats. It's a limited question, but it's one indicator.
And what's been the response from lawmakers to all of this?
A number of bills have come forward not only to regulate NDAs, but to try to force the cost of producing the electricity that will be needed to try to force that onto the data centers. But none of those bills made it through the process. In Wisconsin, we've already finished up the legislative session for this year. So unless there were an extraordinary session called, those things won't be taken up again until 2027. The focus instead, at least for the time being, would be on the State Public Service Commission, which regulates utilities. The pressure on that agency to try to craft agreements with power companies to see that the power cost, that the cost of generating the power is covered by the data centers versus the general ratepayers. And that's still playing out.
All right. Well, Tom, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Rob.
You can find Tom's reporting at wisconsinwatch.org. We'll link to some of his stories in the description and the show notes. And for more stories about the Great Lakes region, check out greatlakesnow.org or search for Great Lakes Now on YouTube.